Well, good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Improving Your Safety Process Through a Thorough Review of Gas Monitoring Data. Our presenter this morning is Dave Wagner, Director of Product Knowledge from Industrial Scientific in Pittsburgh. Dave has in excess of 20 years' experience in the development and application of gas monitoring systems. So over to you now, Dave.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, so I like to start these presentations off with a little quote. Something that I stole from IBM, or I'd say I borrowed from IBM. If you're familiar with the Masters golf tournament, I know you had the Australian Masters earlier in the year, but the Masters here is coming up in the next couple of weeks, and it's always televised by IBM, and they run these commercials, and they had a tagline on one of their commercials during the tournament that said this: having data is one thing, knowing what to do with it is another game. And that really is what we're talking about today. Our gas monitoring programs give us the ability to have a lot of data, to learn a lot of things. Knowing what to do with it so that we benefit by it, though, is quite another story. And hopefully today we're going to show you how to get in that game a little better. So if we go back to the mid-'80s, the CEO of DuPont he had a dilemma. He was looking at their company, and he had two facilities in the company. Both of those facilities made the exact same end product. They were, for all intents and purposes, identical facilities. They had the same processes, the same tools, made the same product, presumably should do the same things, but when it came to safety, they had very, very different results. One facility had a very, very good, virtually spotless safety record, and the other facility had a terrible safety record. And he wanted to know why these two facilities that did the same thing performed very differently. So they set out to study this, and they took a look at this, and they found out that 4% of the injuries that they had in their facilities were caused by poor conditions. They were caused by at-risk conditions. 4% of their injuries, 4% of their accidents, 4% of their reportables were caused by at-risk conditions. 96% of those workplace injuries, however, were caused by at-risk acts. 4% by at-risk conditions, 96% by at-risk acts or at-risk behaviors of the employees in those facilities. And that led them to this conclusion and the creation of the DuPont-Bradley curve that says the existence of unsafe acts and conditions and the injuries that result from them are signs of a weak safety culture. And what they showed and what they determined was that the stronger the safety culture within the facility, the fewer injuries that they had. They went from being a reactive culture with respect to safety and only doing things when an injury occurred to taking a very proactive approach, really strengthening their safety culture, improving their performance overall, and reducing the number of injuries that they had within the company. So when we look at gas detection, how do we translate this? Well, if you're going to uncover at-risk acts and at-risk conditions within a gas detection program within your company, there are three things you need to know. Three things you have to know about your program in order to run it effectively and manage it effectively. And they're quite simple. The first one is, do your gas detectors work properly? The second is, are they used properly? Are the people that you have given a gas detector to take out and use on a daily basis using it properly? And the third one, what gas hazards are your team members or your people being exposed to on a daily basis? If you can answer those three questions about your gas detection program confidently, then you have a successful program, you know what's going on, and you probably have a pretty strong safety culture behind that. So let's talk about your gas detectors working properly. Do they work properly? And there's some measures of that, and the first is bump testing. And I want to take a little bit of time to talk about bump testing. Those of you who may know me, who may have met me, may have talked to me at some point about gas detection, I'm certain have heard me say this, and I have to take the opportunity to say it again. The only way that you know that a gas detector will actually respond to a dangerous gas is to test it with gas. There's no other way. There's no pushing a button. There's nothing you can do to be absolutely certain that if that detector, that instrument, is placed in an atmosphere with a hazardous concentration of gas, that it's going to detect it without previously testing it with gas. There's no other way. Anybody that says any differently is telling you probably what you want to hear. Trust me, there is no other way. So what's a bump test? It's very simple. It's just a brief exposure of an instrument to a concentration of the gas that it's supposed to detect. It verifies that the sensors respond. It verifies that the instrument alarms are functional. It indicates that the detector has not catastrophically failed. It's in working order. It's functional. And if it encounters a dangerous concentration of gas, it's going to respond to it. It doesn't measure the accuracy of the instrument. It doesn't say it's going to read plus or minus 2% or some exact quantity. It says the instrument's working, and if you have to rely on it to save your life, it is going to do so. So when we look at that, back in 2010, early 2011, we took a look at our iNet data, and our database was building up data from our customers, which we'll talk more about a little bit later. And what did we find with regard to bump testing? We found that 3 in every 1,000 gas detectors tested daily were going to fail a bump test. 3 in every 1,000 tested every day are going to fail a bump test. That means if you have a fleet of 1,000 instruments, you're going to test them all tomorrow. If they were tested today, it doesn't matter. We test all 1,000 again tomorrow. 3 of them are going to fail a bump test. Now, if we stretch that test out, that interval out to 30 days and say we don't test every 30 days or every day, we test every 30 days, well, I can tell you that the data says that 12 out of every 1,000 are going to fail when you do that test. Here's the problem with that. You don't know which 12 are going to fail, and you don't know when in that 30-day period they actually did fail. You know they failed the test on the 30th day, but did something happen to the instrument on the first day that caused it to fail, and it's been used for the next 29 days in a failed condition, not working without anybody knowing it? You don't know. Here's the bad news. 3 in every 1,000 are going to fail on a daily basis. 12 in every 1,000 tested 30 days are going to fail. Gas detectors on average, based on the data that we have, are bump tested on average every 51 days. And 1 in 100 gas detectors not bump tested before use are going to be exposed to a hazardous concentration of gas and fail to respond to that dangerous condition. So not bump testing an instrument is critical. It's a critical measure in being able to know whether your gas detectors are working properly or not. I can't stress it enough, but nevertheless, we'll move on. Next measure of whether your gas detectors work properly is calibration. Gas detectors have to be calibrated, and according to McGraw-Hill, calibration is the process of determining the performance parameters of an instrument by comparing it with measurement standards, by setting it to a known standard. This is the measure of accuracy of the device. As I said, the bump test wasn't. The bump test is just a test of functionality. Calibration assures you that the device is going to produce results within some defined criteria with a specified degree of accuracy and confidence, and the instrument that you have in your hand. Why do we calibrate? Because all gas sensors, all instruments are going to deteriorate over time. They're going to deteriorate depending on the use conditions, the environmental conditions they're exposed to, possibly based on how much gas they see. A number of factors are going to come into play that change the accuracy and cause deterioration over time of your detector, and the only way to combat that and correct for it is calibration. You have to calibrate instruments regularly if you're going to know that they work properly. Two very simple measures of whether your instruments are working properly. Second thing you need to know, and I've reversed the order a little bit here for no other reason than just because I want to. What gas hazards are your team members exposed to? This number jumps out at me, 1,410,286. And I'm sure you're all wondering, what does that mean? It seems like a random number. 1,410,286. If you go back a couple years, we used to run this number at the top of our website. If you visited our website at indsci.com, you would see this number. That number represents the number of gas detector alarm events that we recorded in a 12-month period in our iNet data from our customers. 1,410,286 alarm events that occurred over 12 months. A tremendous number. To me, that number, when I saw it the first time and we looked at it, was rather staggering. If we look at our iNet data today, we have recorded more than 19 million alarm events in total. 19 million times that our customers have taken an instrument into an area where the gas levels were above or what the thresholds would be considered for alarms and given an alarm indication. A tremendous number. Here's the question. How many of those alarms, how many of those events are actually investigated to determine what caused them? And more so than that, how many of those alarms, how many of those events are even reported or identified by the end users? I can tell you from past experience and past history, not many. Not many. Most of the time, a worker having an instrument, historically it goes into alarm. You know, they may respond to it one way or the other. They may stop working. They may not stop working. They may evacuate an area temporarily. Most of the time, they never say anything about it. And as someone responsible for safety or someone responsible for the program, most of the time you didn't even know that it happened. When we look back at that data again, what did we see when it came to alarms? We saw that generally speaking, a gas detector produces a high alarm event once every 10 days. On average, every 10 days, gas detector goes into a high alarm or sees a concentration of gas above a high alarm threshold. Now, when we look at this graph on the slide, we see a couple things here. What do we see? We see this data from a gas detector on the left-hand side that represents an instrument that was taken out for use. It was turned on. It went into alarm. The concentration of gas jumped up above the alarm threshold, which in this case was 5% LEL. It dropped down a little bit, and then over about a period of an hour and a half or so, it finally went back down to where it was no longer an alarm and settled out and stabilized out. Now, presumably, the worker continued to carry that instrument and listen to it in alarm and just let it go, or didn't recognize that was in an alarm for a period of an hour and a half with the instrument in alarm indicating that something was wrong, virtually did not pay attention to it. So the alarm cleared, and what do we see happen a few hours later? On the right side of that graph, the instrument crossed the alarm threshold again, and what happened? The data stops. The user turned the instrument off. Instrument goes into alarm. I don't have time to deal with this. I'm going to turn the instrument off. I've got to get my work done. It happens. It happens many times. In fact, if you have a fleet of 500 instruments in your program, 47 of them are going to be turned off during a high alarm event in the next year. That's what the data that we have shows. 500 instruments, there are going to be 47 that are turned off and ignored during a potentially dangerous event or condition. If we look at another use case, this is a similar situation. Someone carrying an instrument, the alarm's set at 10 and 20% LEL. This user took his instrument out. Things were going along nicely. It went into alarm. They presume it looks like they left the area, came back, it went into alarm again. They left the area, came back, it went into alarm again. And they did that repeatedly, but the key is that each time the instrument went into alarm, they didn't turn it off. They did something about it. They got out of the area. They moved. They recognized the alarm and reacted to it. All things that we see in data from the program. So when you look at these types of situations, how do you uncover them? How do you uncover at-risk conditions or at-risk behaviors in your gas detection program? And you do it by paying attention to the 3 rules of gas detection. The first one is to test. We already talked about it, but it's worth saying it again. The only way to know that your gas detector is going to respond to a hazardous condition is to expose it to a known concentration of the target gas and verify the functionality. That is the only way. If you don't take any other point away from this webinar today, please, please take that one. It's the most important thing I can say. So rule number 1 is test. Rule number 2 is calibrate. A lot of things affect the accuracy of an instrument. The only way you can correct for them is to calibrate. It should be done regularly, and it's vital to the success of your program. It's vital to be able to see bad conditions. And then the third is to review the data. You cannot see any of these things without looking at the data. You have gas detectors that log data. You need to review that regularly, look for indicators of problems that may exist before they occur, be able to proactively fix them, change processes, change tools, change things that need to be changed and fixed before some tragedy strikes. So when we look at that, data that you have in your program that you can have at your fingertips will answer that question. Do your gas detectors work properly? You have bump test schedules and bump test results, calibration schedules and calibration results, instruments that are past due for bump test, instruments that are past due for calibration, instruments with marginal or failed sensors, instruments that need to have firmware updated, that are 6 revisions behind and haven't been updated in the last 4 years. You have low and empty expired gas cylinders. All of these things that you can have data on in your program and that your program will produce data for are giving you indications that your gas detectors will work properly. How do you see that your gas detectors are used properly? What indicators are there? Well, you can see if an instrument's been used without a bump test. You can see if it's been used without completing a scheduled calibration or being past due for calibration. You can see incidents where gas detectors have been turned off during alarm conditions. You can see if gas detector alarm values are set where they're supposed to be, if the standards that you've set up for your company for the instrumentation are being maintained. You can see if an instrument has been used when and where it was supposed to be. All these things are indicators that your gas detectors are being used properly. And then we go to the third and maybe the most important. What gas hazards are your team members exposed to? You have data, or you can have data that show you when alarm events occur, what areas within your plants they occurred in, what detectors were in alarm, who was using the gas detector that was in alarm, what gas caused the alarm, how high was the concentration, how long did it last. All these things that are going to give you some indication of the conditions in your facility with respect to hazardous gases and what your people are being exposed to. All very important. So how do you look at these things? How do you collect this data? How do you see it? How do you view it? And our answer to that is iNet Control. iNet Control is a hosted gas detection data management platform. It takes all the data from your gas detectors after they're placed on a docking station for bump testing, calibrating, record retrieval, data download, diagnostic testing, all these things that your docking station can do for you, can automate for you, and collect data on, and puts it in a format that you can use it to answer those three questions. And iNet Control is really broken down into three main areas. Equipment management, or are your instruments working properly? People management, are your instruments being used properly? And hazard management, what are your people being exposed to? That is the functionality that you get within iNet Control. And obviously there are intersections between those three functions. So iNet Control allows you to manage your gas detection program from any web-enabled PC, any device with a web browser, anywhere in the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It allows you to schedule and trigger bump tests and calibrations, initiate diagnostic events, not just on your instruments, but on your docking stations as well. Review data that's been recorded by the instruments, set up instrument parameters, change your alarm settings, verify that your alarm settings are where they're supposed to be, configure and download reports on the data that you want to see on a regular basis and have them emailed to you automatically once a week or twice a week or once a day, whatever you want. Assign users to instruments, track alarms and exposures. All of these things that fall into those three buckets of iNet Control in terms of managing the equipment, managing the people, and managing the hazards. These are just a couple of screens from iNet Control that show you the dashboard and pieces of the dashboard where you see notifications about your equipment and indications of things that might be wrong with your equipment or show you indications of alarms. All of these can be opened up and drilled down into you to show you a lot more detail in the data, but just a couple of quick examples of what iNet Control looks like. And then there's another screenshot here of iNet Control which shows you the iNet Performance Index, or your safety score, or your gas detection score, whatever you want to call it, and areas where you may need to spend some time and where you need to direct some attention that are potential problems for you and areas that are detracting from that score. And when we look at that score, what does it really reflect? Well, it's a reflection of maintenance practices. It looks at the frequency of calibration and bump tests of your instruments and whether your instruments are up to date. It's a reflection of use practices. It shows you, well, okay, are instruments being turned off in alarm, or instruments being used without a bump test or used without a calibration? And it's a reflection of hazardous conditions. How often are your instruments going alarm? How long do they stay in alarm once an alarm event occurs? How high are the readings? How much time does an instrument spend in high alarm? All these things come together to form this performance index. And what does it really mean? What's the relationship between iNet control and how iNet control is used and overall safety? And we look at this, and we look at this graph that plots the safety score, or the iNet performance index, over a large group of users against how many times those users log into iNet control. And you look at that and you say, that's kind of interesting. I don't really get it. I don't really see a correlation there, but there is a correlation. And what the correlation shows is that the only users with low scores are on the very left-hand side of the graph, and are users that don't log into iNet control and look at their data with any type of frequency at all. Now, granted, some of those low-frequency users have high scores. They may have very small programs that don't have very much risk associated with them. They may not use their instruments very often. There are a lot of reasons why somebody that doesn't log into iNet control may have a high score. You may run a great program without looking into the data an awful lot, just based on the nature of the program. But the other side of it is frequent users always have high scores. The people that log into iNet control often and review their data often always have a high score. There's nobody that goes into iNet control based on the graph and the data every day that has a low safety score. So it goes back to the Bradley curve. The more we use it, the more we pay attention to it, the more awareness we have of the data and what it means, the stronger culture we're going to have and the better we're going to perform. Very easily understood from the data. So let's spend a little bit of time looking at a real case. One of our customers, I won't name them, but this is a very large petroleum producer. This is a company I believe is not active in Australia, of the major companies. But back in 2007, they had an H2S related fatality. And when they investigated that fatality, one of the things that became very clear to them was that they needed to overhaul their gas detection program. They needed to make some serious corrections to what they were doing. They needed to get better. They had some major issues. So we go to 2008 when they joined on with Industrial Scientific and they signed up with our iNet program. In the first 6 months of the program, when they signed on, they had 442 gas monitors active in their fleet in this particular facility. And over those 6 months, they had 1,450 high alarm events. They were astonished by that. It had taken them completely by surprise. They just were unaware that they were having those types of issues with instruments being carried by personnel going into alarm. As I said before, not reported. No awareness that this was occurring at all. So they implemented a program, determined the root cause of each and every alarm event. They start from their docking stations from iNet control. They could see when an instrument went into alarm, and they would go immediately after they saw that alarm had occurred and investigate it, determine the root cause of each one, find out what happened. 1,450 alarms in 6 months they did a root cause analysis on. If we fast forward to 2011, in the last 6 months, but granted this is some older data, but in the last 6 months of that program in 2011, they had increased the number of gas monitors in that facility to 678. So they increased the number of gas detectors by 53%. and they had reduced the number of alarm events in that 6-month period through changes in their process, changes in their work behaviors, changes in people behaviors, down to 530. So they increased their number of gas detectors by 53%. They reduced the number of alarms by 63%, all because they took the data, they paid attention to it, they found out where their problems were, what was causing them, and they proactively stepped in to correct them. They could not have done that without reviewing the data, collecting it and reviewing it. They introduced the program throughout the company. Today we monitor data, they monitor data from, it was 3,790 then in 2011. It's well over 4,000, probably over 5,000 instruments they have in their program total company-wide today. They continue to root cause each and every alarm event that occurs because they're striving for more improvement. And when it comes down to it, an H2S fatality, a gas-related fatality in your facility is going to do that to you. They have an awareness. They had a fatality. It was a terrible thing. They don't want to have another. And they're determined that they won't. And these are the steps that they've taken by being able to collect the data, analyze it, see what's going on, to see that it doesn't happen again. When we look at iNet today over what it was, today we have over 310 billion data log gas readings from instruments, 19,700,000 alarm events from 162,000 gas detectors in the system. If you go back to 2011, we were looking at about 57,000 gas detectors in the system. Today, over 162,000 gas detectors in the system that we monitor for our customers. We collect data from them and give them the opportunity to go into a program like iNet Control and see that data and manage their program on nearly 7,000 customer sites in 31 countries. So the growth of the program has been tremendous. People are using it, customers are using it, benefiting by it. They're improving their safety culture, they're improving their safety record. And it really makes you ask the question, does reviewing and acting on your data really help improve your safety? And the data clearly says, yes, it does.
Once again, I'd really like to thank Dave Wagner for his presentation today. Really appreciate the time that you've taken out in the evening to do this. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Peter.